The lawyer slid a folder across the polished conference table with deliberate calm. Let's start with the October 4th report filed by Madeline Voss. I watched the HR director's spine go rigid. Her face drained of color. Across from her, my former manager, Trevor Blake, visibly flinched. His confident posture collapsed inward. I sat perfectly still at the end of the table, hands folded, expression neutral. They weren't supposed to say my name. That report was supposed to be buried, forgotten, lost in whatever digital graveyard HR used for complaints they didn't want to handle. But there it was. October 4th. My name. Spoken aloud in a legal deposition with attorneys recording every word. Trevor couldn't look at me. The HR director stared at her hands. And I finally understood what power felt like after 2 years of feeling powerless. 2 years ago, I reported Trevor for harassment. I was 29, a mid-level marketing analyst at Cornerstone Media Group, working hard and trying to build a career I could be proud of. I'd gone to HR with documentation, dates, specific incidents. I'd done everything right. And HR told me not to make it political. Those were the exact words. Madeline, we understand you're uncomfortable, but workplace dynamics can be complex. Making this political won't help your career here. I left that meeting feeling smaller than when I'd entered. Like I'd done something wrong by speaking up. So I quit. But I didn't leave empty-handed. I took every screenshot, every email, every piece of evidence I'd collected. Now legal had just said my name in a formal deposition. And they couldn't ignore me anymore. It started subtle. A Slack message at 10:53 p.m. on a Tuesday. I was finishing a campaign report when the notification appeared. You're always on my mind after hours. Trevor Blake. My direct manager. I stared at the message, confused. We'd been in meetings all day about quarterly targets. Nothing personal. Nothing that would explain this. I typed back carefully. Was that meant for someone else? I watched the typing bubble appear. Then it vanished. No response. No clarification. No apology. I took a screenshot anyway. Something felt wrong. The message sat there in my DMs, inappropriate and unexplained. I told myself I was overreacting. Maybe it was a joke I didn't understand. Maybe he'd clicked the wrong name. But I saved it. Just in case. That screenshot would matter more than I knew. The messages continued. Not constantly. Just often enough to make me uncomfortable. Comments about my appearance in meetings. Questions about my weekend plans that felt too personal. Once, he asked if I was seeing anyone, then added, just curious. I started documenting everything. But when I mentioned it to a coworker, she shrugged. That's just Trevor. He's friendly with everyone. Was I being too sensitive? I didn't know anymore. Finally, I went to HR, sat across from the HR director, Pauline Crawford, and explained the pattern. Showed her the messages. Described the comments. She listened with a practiced expression of concern. Then she said the words that would haunt me. We understand it's uncomfortable, but there's nothing actionable here. He hasn't threatened your job or touched you inappropriately. Keep doing great work. I walked out feeling like I'd imagined everything. My annual review came 3 months later. The feedback was glowing. Exceptional strategic thinking. Strong team collaboration. Consistently exceeds expectations. Then Trevor delivered the final verdict. However, you're not quite ready for the senior analyst role yet. Let's revisit in 6 months. I stared at him, confused. Every metric supported my promotion. My projects had driven measurable results. Other analysts with less experience had been promoted. What do I need to improve? I asked carefully. Trevor smiled. Just keep developing. You'll get there. But I wouldn't. I realized it sitting there. He was blocking me. Punishing me for going to HR, even though HR had done nothing. That night, I created a new folder on my personal laptop. Evidence. I started saving everything systematically. Screenshots. Emails. Meeting notes. HR documentation. They could ignore my voice. But they couldn't ignore a paper trail. The comments got worse. Trevor started calling me too sensitive in team meetings. Once, when I questioned a budget decision, he laughed. There goes Madeline, taking things personally again. The team laughed with him. Not meanly. Just uncomfortably. Like they didn't know what else to do. I stared down at my coffee cup, face burning. That night, I wrote a detailed memo to myself. Time. Date. Exact words. Witnesses present. This is how women disappear, I typed. One joke at a time. One comment that makes you smaller. Until you're invisible. I saved it in the evidence folder. Each document felt like a small act of resistance. Like I was building something that mattered, even if nobody saw it yet. I was creating my own protection since the company wouldn't. A colleague named Bryce approached me quietly after a particularly uncomfortable team meeting. We'd never been close, but he looked genuinely troubled. Can I tell you something? He asked, glancing around the break room. Trevor did the same thing to someone in legal a few years ago. She reported him. Nothing happened. She left quietly about 6 months later. My stomach dropped. Do you remember her name? Bryce shook his head. She was before my time. I just heard people mention it once. That's when I realized this wasn't new. This was a pattern. Trevor had done this before. HR knew. And they'd let him continue. The woman from legal had probably documented everything too. And it hadn't mattered. She'd left quietly. Disappeared. Just like they wanted me to. But I wasn't going to disappear. Not anymore. I handed in my resignation on a Wednesday morning. No drama. No accusations. No final confrontation. I walked into Pauline's office and placed the letter on her desk. Thank you for the opportunity, I said politely. I've accepted a position elsewhere. Pauline looked relieved. We're sorry to see you go, Madeline. You've been a valuable team member. Valuable. The word felt hollow. I wasn't valuable enough to protect. Just valuable enough to pretend to appreciate when I left quietly. I cleaned out my desk that afternoon. Said polite goodbyes. Trevor shook my hand and wished me well, like nothing had ever happened. I walked out of Cornerstone Media Group with a hard drive in my bag containing 2 years of documentation. My story wasn't finished. It was just waiting. 7 months passed. I started a new job at a different company. Better culture. Respectful management. I began to heal. Then one evening, my personal email pinged. A message from Bryce, my former colleague. Hey Madeline, thought you should know. Trevor just got reported again. Someone on his new team. It's causing a lot of internal tension. I read the message 3 times. New team. He'd been promoted after I left. And now someone else was going through exactly what I had. I didn't respond to Bryce. Instead, I opened my laptop and navigated to the folder I hadn't touched in months. Evidence. Every screenshot. Every document. Every piece of proof I'd collected. I didn't know what I'd do with it yet. But I knew I wouldn't let it stay buried anymore. 2 weeks later, an attorney contacted me through LinkedIn. Her name was Victoria Hayes, and her message was professionally direct. MS. Voss, I'm conducting interviews related to a workplace misconduct investigation at Cornerstone Media Group. Your name came up during preliminary research. Would you be willing to participate in a confidential conversation? I stared at the message. Someone was finally investigating. Finally asking questions. Finally looking at what HR had ignored. I replied immediately. I'd be willing to participate. And I have documentation you might want to see. Victoria responded within an hour. That would be extremely valuable. Can we schedule a call? For the first time in nearly 2 years, I felt something shift. Maybe my voice would finally matter. Maybe the evidence I'd carefully preserved would actually be used. Maybe someone would finally listen. The initial interview happened over video call. Victoria was sharp, focused, and took detailed notes. I walked her through everything. The messages. The comments. The blocked promotion. The HR meeting where Pauline told me nothing was actionable. Do you have documentation of your HR report? Victoria asked. I pulled up the email I'd sent to HR on October 4th, 2 years ago. Subject line, formal complaint, workplace harassment. I'd CC'd myself on my personal email. Time-stamped. Detailed. Professional. HR told me they'd handle it internally, I explained. Then nothing happened. When I followed up, Pauline said the matter had been reviewed and closed. Victoria's expression didn't change, but I saw something flicker in her eyes. They told you it was closed? I nodded. She said there wasn't enough evidence to proceed. Victoria made a note. Interesting. Because according to their records, your report doesn't exist. I gave my formal statement 3 weeks later. In Victoria's office. Calm. Clear. No embellishment needed. The facts spoke for themselves. Here are the Slack logs, I said, pulling up timestamped screenshots. Here's how HR responded. I showed the email chain. Here's my written report they claimed didn't exist. I pulled up the original complaint, sent from my work email, received and acknowledged by Pauline Crawford. Victoria photographed everything. This is exactly what we needed, she said quietly. Your documentation is meticulous. I'd spent 2 years thinking my evidence was useless. That nobody would care. That HR's dismissal meant I was wrong to complain. But sitting in that office, watching Victoria catalog every piece of proof I'd saved, I realized something. My documentation wasn't useless. It was a weapon. And I'd been holding it this entire time. Word started spreading at Cornerstone. I heard it through Bryce, who'd remained a friendly contact. Things are weird here, he messaged. Lots of closed-door meetings. Legal's been interviewing people. Someone said old complaints are being reviewed. Then he sent another message. There was a Slack thread in the management channel about the investigation. It went quiet mid-conversation. Then the whole thread disappeared. People are nervous. I imagined the panic. Managers realizing old decisions were being examined. HR scrambling to find documentation they'd claimed didn't exist. Trevor wondering who had talked. My LinkedIn profile views skyrocketed. People from Cornerstone checking to see where I'd landed. What I was doing. Whether I was involved. I didn't confirm anything. Just watched from a distance as the company that ignored me finally faced consequences. Victoria called me in early December. Madeline, we're moving forward with a formal deposition. The case has expanded beyond the current complainant. We're examining systemic failures in HR's handling of harassment reports. I'd like you to appear as a corroborating witness. My hands shook slightly. What would that involve? You testify under oath about your experience. Your documentation would be entered as evidence. It's voluntary, but your participation would significantly strengthen the case. I thought about the woman from legal who'd left quietly. About the current employee going through what I had. About every future employee who might report harassment. I'll do it, I said. But I want my own attorney present. Victoria didn't hesitate. Absolutely. That's smart. I'd learned. This time, I'd protect myself properly. Nobody else would speak for me. I'd speak for myself, with legal protection and undeniable evidence. The deposition happened in a downtown law office. Cold January morning. I arrived with my attorney, a sharp woman named Alexis Park who specialized in employment law. The conference room was intimidating. Long table. Recording equipment. Court reporter. And there they were. Trevor Blake. Pauline Crawford. Cornerstone's legal team. Trevor looked older. Tired. He couldn't meet my eyes. Pauline sat rigid, expression carefully blank. Neither of them had expected to see me here. I could tell by their faces. They'd thought I'd left quietly. Stayed buried. Moved on. But I was here. With 2 years of evidence and nothing left to lose. Victoria nodded at me as I sat down. Alexis squeezed my hand briefly under the table. The court reporter prepared to record. And then Victoria opened that folder. The one that started everything. Let's begin. Victoria's voice was calm and professional. Can you state your name for the record? Madeline Voss. And were you employed at Cornerstone Media Group from June 2021 through March 2023? Yes. During your employment, did you file a formal harassment complaint with Human Resources? Yes. October 4, 2022. Pauline shifted uncomfortably. Victoria didn't look at her yet. Can you describe what prompted that complaint? I detailed everything. The late-night messages. The inappropriate comments. The blocked promotion. Trevor stared at the table. His attorney took notes rapidly. And what was HR's response to your complaint? Pauline Crawford told me the behavior wasn't actionable. That I shouldn't make it political. That I should keep doing great work. The air in the room changed. Even Trevor's attorney looked up sharply. Victoria pulled out a document. And did you receive any written follow-up? Yes. An email stating the matter had been reviewed and closed. Victoria turned to Pauline. Her tone remained professional, but the question landed like a hammer. Ms. Crawford, can you explain why Ms. Voss's October 4th complaint was never escalated to senior leadership? Pauline's carefully composed expression cracked. We handle many complaints. We assess each situation based on company policy and determine appropriate action. Was any action taken regarding Mr. Blake's behavior? Silence. Pauline glanced at Cornerstone's attorney, who nodded slightly. We provided coaching. Coaching, Victoria repeated. Can you provide documentation of this coaching? More silence. Ms. Crawford, do you have any documentation showing that Ms. Voss's complaint was investigated? Pauline's voice was barely audible. I'd need to review our files. Please do, Victoria said. Because according to the documentation provided to us, no investigation occurred. No report exists in your system. And Ms. Voss's complaint was effectively buried. Nobody spoke. Because there was no answer. No excuse. Just failure. Victoria laid documents across the table like cards in a winning hand. Printed Slack messages with timestamps. My original email complaint with Pauline's acknowledgement. The follow-up email where Pauline called further pursuit risky in today's climate. Most damning of all, the HR system logs showing my complaint had been marked resolved within 48 hours. No investigation notes. No witness interviews. No documentation except Pauline's closure statement. These messages, Victoria said, indicating Trevor's late-night slacks, were sent over a 6-month period. This complaint, she tapped my October 4th email, detailed patterns of harassment. This response, she pointed to Pauline's dismissal, effectively silenced Ms. Voss. Trevor's attorney requested a break. Pauline looked physically ill. Cornerstone's legal team huddled together, whispering urgently. The court reporter kept typing. And I sat there, finally vindicated. My evidence wasn't useless. It was devastating. Everything I'd saved, everything I'd documented, everything they'd dismissed, now mattered. The original plaintiff expanded her claim 3 weeks later. What started as one woman's harassment complaint became a systemic failure lawsuit. My evidence became core documentation. 2 other former employees came forward with similar stories. One was the woman from legal that Bryce had mentioned. She'd kept her documentation too. We compared timelines and found the pattern. Trevor had been doing this for 5 years. HR had been dismissing complaints for 5 years. The company had been protecting him for 5 years. The case went public in February. Industry publications picked it up. Media company faces systemic harassment claims. The comments section filled with stories from other companies. Other women who'd been dismissed. Our case became bigger than Cornerstone. It became about every HR department that chose reputation over protection. Every manager allowed to continue harmful behavior. Every woman told her complaint wasn't actionable. Trevor was terminated in March. The company released a one-line statement. Cornerstone Media Group has parted ways with Trevor Blake, former Senior Director of Marketing Operations. We thank him for his service and wish him well in future endeavors. Corporate language. Carefully neutral. But everyone knew what it meant. I checked his LinkedIn profile that afternoon. Gone. Deleted within 2 hours of the announcement. His entire professional presence erased. I didn't feel triumphant. Just tired. This could have been handled 2 years ago. If HR had investigated. If Pauline had escalated. If anyone had taken my October 4th complaint seriously. Trevor would have faced consequences then. Other women wouldn't have been harassed. The company wouldn't be facing a lawsuit. But they'd chosen silence. And now they were paying for it. Pauline Crawford resigned 6 weeks later. The announcement called it voluntary. A mutual decision. Time for new challenges. But an internal memo leaked within hours. Someone forwarded it to the press. The memo detailed Pauline's failure to escalate multiple harassment complaints over 3 years. Her decision to mark cases closed without investigation. Her email advising me that pursuing my complaint was risky in today's climate. She hadn't just ignored my report. She'd actively discouraged me from pushing it. The memo concluded that her continued employment posed significant legal and reputational risk. She was forced out. Her career in HR effectively over. And I felt something complicated. Not satisfaction exactly. More like justice. Incomplete and messy, but real. She'd protected Trevor and the company's image instead of employees. Now she faced consequences too. A journalist published a feature story in April. Harassment ignored, when HR becomes the problem. It detailed systemic failures across multiple companies. Used our case as the central example. I wasn't named specifically, but anyone at Cornerstone knew. The article quoted anonymous sources describing the culture of silence. How complaints disappeared. How HR protected management over employees. Comments poured in from readers sharing similar experiences. The story went viral. HR professionals debated it online. Companies issued statements recommitting to safe workplace policies. Our lawsuit had sparked something bigger. A conversation about accountability. About documentation. About what happens when the systems meant to protect workers actively harm them instead. My October 4th complaint became a symbol. Proof that speaking up mattered, even when initially ignored. That evidence could surface years later and finally bring justice. New opportunities appeared in May. 2 firms reached out directly. Both had seen coverage of the case. Both explicitly valued my role as a whistleblower. We're building a compliance team focused on actually handling harassment complaints properly, one recruiter explained. We need someone who understands what failure looks like. Someone who documented everything and spoke up despite personal cost. I interviewed with both. Chose a corporate compliance role at a tech company serious about reform. My experience surviving a broken system made me valuable to companies trying to build better ones. It was strange. The worst professional experience of my life had become my strongest qualification. I started the new position in June. On my first day, I led a training session on documentation and reporting. Taught employees how to protect themselves. Some faces in that room looked familiar. Tired. Uncertain. Like they'd tried reporting and been dismissed. I saw myself in them. Cornerstone requested an official exit interview. More than a year after I'd left. Their new HR director, hired after Pauline's resignation, reached out personally. We're reviewing past employee experiences as part of our cultural reform. Would you be willing to complete an anonymous survey? I agreed. But I didn't stay anonymous. In the open comments section, I wrote exactly what happened. I left because I was harassed by my manager. I reported it to HR on October 4, 2022. I was told not to make it political. My complaint was buried. My career was impacted. I stayed quiet because I thought HR would help. They didn't. They protected my harasser instead. I only got justice through legal action 2 years later. That shouldn't be necessary. I hit submit. Later, I heard they used my response in company-wide training. Showed it to new HR staff as an example of catastrophic failure. My words finally being heard. The case settled in August. Cornerstone paid millions. The terms were confidential, but the message was clear. Ignoring harassment complaints costs more than addressing them. I received a settlement payment. Not life-changing money, but validation. The company that dismissed my October 4th report now paid me for being right. I never spoke to anyone from Cornerstone again. Didn't need to. One night, alone in my apartment, I opened the deposition transcript. Read through pages of testimony. Found the line that had started everything. Let's start with the October 4th report filed by Madeline Voss. I read it aloud in my quiet living room. Let the words settle. They'd tried to erase that report. Pretend it didn't exist. But here it was. In legal records. Part of case law. Permanent. I smiled. Closed the document. Now they remember, I whispered. And finally, I let it all go.